The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
A little more than a year ago, we talked to 4 brand new city council members. They're back to talk about what they learned in their freshman year. The game is politics. The game is on. Welcome to the game. I'm Mark Simon. My partner Kevin Mullen is on assignment, and he's not here today. A year ago, voters elected the most diverse group of city council members in local history, and the election signaled the emergence of a new generation of leadership that includes more women and people of color. We interviewed 4 new council members representative of the changes in who runs for and wins local office. And we've invited them back almost a year later to ask them what they learned in their first year in office and what surprised them. We are joined by Foster City Councilwoman Richa Awasthi. Welcome, thank you for being here. South San Francisco Councilman Mark Nagales, welcome back.
Thank you.
Redwood City Councilwoman Giselle Hale, and Menlo Park Councilman Drew Combs. Thank you all for being here. Let's start, go left to my right. Richa, let's start with you. What's the main, first thing that comes to mind when I ask you what you learned in year 1?
So much, but I think the number one for me would be that you cannot overemphasize collaboration, the importance of collaboration. Whether it's at the local level, so working with council members and working with the staff, but also at regional level. There are so many issues that we are facing today that are regional in nature, and that I would say is my biggest learning. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.
Drew Combs, how about you?
Yeah, I would say I learned the value of sort of doing your homework and engaging in subject matter experts. Like, you know, our council over the past year, like a lot of councils along the peninsula, took up some pretty major issues, whether it's, you know, do red light cameras make traffic safer or not? You know, the issues surrounding public employee pensions, building moratoriums, are they effective? When can you do them? And so just really, like, as we're taking up those topics, engaging, you know, people who have done studies, who know about these issues, I've found really important.
Giselle.
Well, thanks for having us, Mark. It was a great rookie year. And I would say the biggest thing I learned is that if you do a job you love, you never work a day in your life. So I really enjoyed this year digging in, echo the sentiments of my colleagues, doing your homework, collaborating. But also I learned that despite what you hear in government, it's possible to get a lot done, even in just a year. And that's what we saw in Redwood City. I mean, the breadth of what we covered is truly phenomenal. There's a lot of context switching, so you do need to rely on doing your homework, you know, talking to residents, talking to experts, and being prepared.
Yeah. Mark Nagales.
I think for me, I've been very fortunate being a newbie that the majority of my council colleagues, they've served for over 20 years. So being able to talk to my colleagues and ask for their advice, I think it's been beneficial to me, because there have been times where we had to deal with some pretty heavy subject matter, and the community has spoken maybe in a different way in terms of how they feel about the issues. So being able to share...
That's a nice euphemistic way to say it.
Being able to share those experiences with colleagues who've done it years over, they can say, you know, this is what you should expect. You know, this is what the questions you should be looking for. But having that shared experience and being able to have mentors like my colleagues, it's been phenomenal and great.
Following up on what you were just saying, I've always wondered how hard it is to learn. You're dealing with something like a new development project. There's a bunch of people in the room. They're all wearing the same T-shirts.
Yeah.
They're all telling you they're going to recall you. But they may be the only people in the whole city who were against this. There may be the great majority who are supportive or don't care. How hard is it to learn that, to not react to what's right in front of you? Oh, that's an open-ended question. Go ahead.
So we actually had a project, the PUC project, a development of 800 units. 160 of them were going to be affordable, would have childcare and a half mile away from the BART station. The neighborhood came out and they were against the height. It's going to be 8 stories. It was actually zoned for 14 stories. The community wanted it to be 4 or 5. So when the council meeting happened and we had to decide on it, I had to explain to them what state law said. I had to explain to them that we can't deny a project based on height or density or reduce the height, or we can end up getting sued and the developer could potentially go up to the maximum height. Once I explained that to the audience, I can see many of them like shaking their heads like, oh, I understand. And after the meeting, they came up to me and said, thank you for explaining that to me, explaining the reason why you had to vote for it, that there were other factors involved. And I think that people really appreciate that when you explain these things, they understand where your rationale is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll add to that. We had an issue around ADUs, so big topic. I don't know if it was
accessory dwelling units.
Thank you,
Small,
granny flat.
tiny little
Yeah,
houses. Yeah.
Let's use the 10 different names for it. Yeah, but obviously an important element of housing, as we are in a housing crisis. And there was a big uprising from a group of neighbors to reduce the stature of them, potentially eliminate the ability to do a second story. And I think we've all seen this, where an issue like that will come up and you'll get a form letter. Sent to you many times. Well, when the actual meeting came, people came out of the woodwork in support of ADUs with such diverse examples of how they needed them for their families, for themselves. The kids were going to move into the main house. And then a few weeks later, we actually worked with the county and did an ADU resource fair on a Sunday afternoon. And we had 300 people show up to that. And to me, that was the canonical example of there are at times a vocal group, and we definitely want to listen to them. We want to engage them. But often it is a majority of residents who feel differently, and they may not, get up and get out until their rights are being threatened. And I think courage is key in this role, and that's sort of the key element to be able to, when you are faced with that group, to do what you did and to explain it.
Yeah, I think there are a few issues that we took up over the course of the year where I also had the concern of, has the council chambers turned into a bubble? And for me, one of the ways I've gotten around that is literally like, I'm engaging the community, whether it's like I'm standing in line at a grocery store, picking up my daughter at daycare. I'm like, hey, you hear, we're thinking of a building moratorium, or that's going to be on the agenda. What do you think about that? And so I take it, it's really, my interactions with people is the reverse. Usually it's them coming to the politician saying like, hey, this is my problem. I'm always going out to them and saying, hey, have you heard of this? What do you think? And so that's one of the things that I've sort of used to sort of gut check, making sure that I'm not being sort of swayed about what is the level of support for something just based on who shows up at council chambers.
Good point.
Now, Richa, in Foster City, it seems to be a particularly contentious year where there are some evident divisions. How, as a first-year member, how do you weave your way through that?
Absolutely.
There's an old saying, God answers all prayers, but sometimes the answer is no. Not that you're all God, but sometimes you just have to say no to people, don't you?
And I have several examples. So one example that comes to my mind, it was relatively early on. So I believe January or February, so Foster City has a gatekeeper process and for development, and there was a potential land use change that the applicant wanted, and that was a really big deal, even though it was a gatekeeper process. One thing was that people didn't understand the gatekeeper process, that the council wasn't going to vote on a land use change. So there were, the council chambers was full with people, and there were a lot of public comments. I listened to all of them, and I had done my homework and was ready to opine on that item, which I did. And right the next day, my inbox was full. I got about 35 to 40 emails questioning my position. And as I read through those emails, I was like, they didn't understand what I was trying to say. So quickly I got the transcript of what my position was, what I said. And because in reading through those emails, I noticed that they were very quick to jump to conclusions and preconceived notions about my position and what I stand for. So I got the transcript of what I had said, and I responded individually to all 35 to 40 emails. And I was surprised, pleasantly surprised. I got the emails back from so many of them thank you for clarifying. I went back and listened to what you said, and it resonates with me. Thank you for clarifying. And I saw in social media and Nextdoor everywhere, people were like, I sent an email to Councilmember Awasthi, and she was very courteous and responded in a polite manner. So that helped a lot, even though there were some who were like, okay, thanks for this explanation, but we're going to be watching you.
Yeah.
That's totally fine.
It's interesting because one of the things you're all talking about, obviously, is communication and how central it is to what you do.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're doing it in a particularly interesting era, which is the social media era, in which we were talking off the air before we ever started, Mark and I, about how things just sort of run away from you online. How difficult is it? You're all on councils with colleagues who've been on for a while before, who didn't have to worry about this before. How much of a central part of your job is social media? Is it possible to say, I can't go there because nobody on this particular site's going to ever say anything good to me or about me? I mean, since communication is so central to the job, how central is social media, and how do you manage it? Drew, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's certainly important. I don't, and I use social media to communicate about developments, agenda items that council is taking up, events I'm going to be at. I don't use it as a dialogue. To be honest, as a back and forth. If there is some issue that someone is posted on social media, I'm likely to email them and say, hey, let's meet up and grab coffee and have a discussion, because I've seen so many times where there is this sort of talking past each other, right? Or that people are trying to make a point.
And face-to-face is a good way to diffuse.
Yeah, and totally. And so I do, I certainly use it as a resource to understand where people are coming from, but I don't use it as a dialogue mechanism.
Yeah. How about all of you? I mean, you work at Facebook. You did for a while. You're on leave right now, but
I think it's really important to also clarify, and I don't know if this happened to you, but when you first get elected, you sit down with your city attorney. They go through the Brown Act with you. And one of the interesting things is that a lot of city attorneys are very leery of allowing you to use social media. And I did have a little issue with that, because I personally used it quite a bit in my election, and I wanted people to feel present. To me, social media is no more than a channel, and it's about meeting people where they are. People are busy. They may not have time to go to meetings. They may not have time to go onto the city website. I want to be where they are.
But
so
sometimes where they are is angry, and they're not interested in being somewhere else.
Well, and let me say something about that, is that at least you respond to them. To Richa's example, where she responded to those emails, I think that's important. Now, Kevin's not here today, but if he was, he might have mentioned that he and I actually authored a bill together that just passed committee, and it's called Modernizing the Brown Act. Because the Brown Act was written in 1952 in the era of the telephone and mail, and we obviously have a more complex system now. And I think it's important that local government feel accessible. And so I struggled with not being able to respond as much as I would have liked to, as much as I did during the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I use it as a tool to communicate with my residents. I go on Nextdoor and the local Facebook pages that follow South San Francisco, and sometimes it's not the most pleasant things that they say about their local elected officials, right? And so, but I do engage with folks there, because there are some serious concerns or issues they have, because I think it's important to engage with them and tell them what's actually happening in real time in terms of their issues, because I'll see things that are not true, or things that potentially we have said. I'm like, we've never said those things.
Right.
And that's how rumors happen, is that you let it spread.
Yeah.
So I try to combat that in the sense, well, this is actually what's happening. This is the truth.
Winston Churchill said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on in the morning. How effective can you be at somebody who's just decided that you are X? You're a tool for developers or something like that. That you've taken lots of money from someone. They'll say something about you that you know isn't true. How effective can you be at combating that, or is it just a matter of, I've at least set the record straight and I have to let it go from there?
I think you just have to let it go. Once you put it out there, say this is, use data and facts, that this is what's actually happening.
Let's hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back to this topic. You stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon, and my partner Kevin Mullen is on assignment. We're joined by 4 rookie members of city councils, reflecting back on their first year. We interviewed them a year ago, and now they're back to talk some more. We were talking about social media. I've stopped you from making a point you wanted to make about, maybe you've already forgotten it. You have this look on your face like you don't remember what we're talking about.
Well, continue.
Oh, that's okay. I'm going to move on to something else, which is, you know, when we interviewed you, it was just after the election. You'd just been sworn in. And so you were still very much in campaign mode, talking about the issues that came up during the campaign. What came up during the year? The late Governor Mario Cuomo always said you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. What came up in the year that you weren't prepared for, that you hadn't talked about, that was just an issue that, you know, like red light, maybe red light at traffic, who knows? But was there an issue that came up and you thought, oh my gosh, I really have to dive into this? This didn't come up at all during the campaign. Drew?
Well, yeah. Well, a couple of the council members who were elected with me were a 5-person council member, and 2 of the other new council members had proposed a building moratorium, and that was something that I didn't expect we'd be taking up during that year. And yeah, really had to get up to speed on what was the history of communities, cities being allowed to enact building moratoriums, and what did they actually stop? Like, it didn't actually stop the processing of use permits or development applications that was prohibited. It did stop the actual sort of shovel in the ground, like getting the permits to build, but it still had to be processed. And just sort of learning that, and then learning what possible legal liabilities it would subject the city to in an era where there's a lot of talk about increasing housing. And so that was something that you know, I really sort of really had to quickly get up to speed on, and was surprised that we were discussing it at the council level.
Yeah.
So I think we're in an era where local control is changing, right? And so one thing for me, I really like being strategic and proactive. I did feel there were times this year where we were on our heels in response to work the state was doing to address the housing crisis, to be clear. And 2 examples come to mind. One is actually on ADUs, where we did work to reset our ADU standards, and then weeks later, the state came out with theirs. So that was interesting. And then the second example was AB 1482, which hit right before the holidays, and we were starting to see people getting either evictions, no-cause evictions, or to have huge rent increases. And Redwood City was one of the first cities to pass an urgency ordinance. But as you know, time and resource are scarce. So every time something like that happened, it meant setting aside other agenda items, right, to address those issues. So one of the things I'm hopeful for this year is to get ahead of some of those issues. We've actually recently hired a legislative assistant in Redwood City, and a lobbyist, if you will, to help us understand what's happening in Sacramento. There's hundreds of bills being proposed, so we can stay ahead of all that.
It must be, like, the first time it happens, it must be sort of a scramble. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even talk about this issue. And you're expected to have a position on it by the time it gets to the dais, even if your position is, we don't need to do this right now. I mean, has that been your, and you all are people who like to prepare and like to do research.
Yeah,
right? So.
I think for me, if I think, I compare from the issues I was talking about during my campaign versus sort of the reality check was getting used to the process. I think, Giselle, you kind of said some of that, but I'm very action-oriented, and I come with that professional corporate mindset, and I'm like, oh, we need to get this done. Let's have a meeting, let's talk about it, and let's have next steps. No, you can't do that. Like, there is a cadence of steps that need to occur to even agendize a thing, which was an adjustment for me. So if you're thinking of getting something done, you need to be extremely proactive about it, at least thinking 6 months ahead of any topic. So I'm taking those learnings and hoping to do better in that respect this year, I guess.
Mark, what about you?
I think for me, because we're going through the process now, is the general plan and thinking about what the city is going to look like 10, 20 years from now. most of us are focusing on the now, what we can get accomplished now. But in reality is, we also have to look down the future. What's the city's going to look like in terms of economic development, in terms of businesses? Those are things we have to think about as a policymaker, is that the decisions we make right now are going to affect what's going to happen down the road.
It's a related question. A lot of people who are in office or run for office find politics easier than governing. Campaigning, you sort of get your stock speech, you go door to door.
Yep.
You're as expert as you're going to be on whatever it is you're talking about. Governing is a different question because, first of all, you have to balance competing interests, and you also have to know a broader range of things. Has that been your experience, or did you find that the two merge together and they're all pretty similar?
They're totally different skill sets.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, it's theoretical versus applied, right? In theory, this is how I would respond if given this question, if given this opportunity. When governing, it's the application, it's the coalition building, which I found one of the most rewarding parts. People who weren't necessarily your allies, your supporters during your campaign, coming together to work with you on an issue of interest was, for me, one of the most rewarding experiences of this year, that you can truly work with anyone and find common ground.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, and just add that for me, politics can be very, very big picture, right? 30,000 feet level stuff, and governing can be incredibly small, right? It can be about like how often the wood chips in the dock section of the park are refreshed, right? I mean, it really gets to where we're going to put speed humps, and so for me, it is always sort of like understanding that dichotomy, that the issues that don't come up during a campaign, very small issues, are the things that people will email you about, and it will be the most important thing in their life, and it will be the one interaction they have with government, the local government, right. And so if how you respond and deliver on that is key, and again, it could be small, but it is very important to them.
I totally agree with that point. I mean, I'm sure we get emails about potholes and all the other things, and that's the biggest issue for that particular person. That if you don't solve it, that's a red flag on you as potentially as a policymaker or as an elected official that this person didn't deliver. And in actuality, there might be some other reasons why. Maybe there's a budget issue, or maybe it's down the road in terms of when we're actually going to fix it. But if you don't fix it at that moment, that is something that individual is going to remember, especially during election time.
Airport noise was mine. I know so much about airport noise now.
That's a big
And you knew
one.
nothing about it before.
I knew nothing.
It didn't come up
like,
during the campaign.
Wow, there's this thing called the FDA.
These things don't come up during the campaign.
No.
And in a lot of ways, campaigning is like interviewing and positioning yourself for a job. And once you get the job, you then quickly learn and do the job. Aside from the small little day-to-day issues that come before you, some of the other big topics also require deep analysis and, as many of us have said, doing our homework. But it's a lot of responsibility. I mean, you do understand while running the campaign, but when you are on that seat, you feel this incredible responsibility of not just catering to your point, to the loudest in the room or the most vocal in the community, but you are thinking about everyone in the community, and you're thinking about what is best for your city, and you're thinking about what is best long-term also, not just, you make this decision and it looks fine now, but so to think through is a lot of homework. So I would say that it's a lot of working behind the scenes, so asking questions, meeting with experts, as you've said earlier, and having that pressure. Like, I felt that a lot more initially, and slowly, in a good way, I'm getting more and more used to that whatever you are deciding, as little or as small as it may seem like, it may have implications for future generations.
One of the points we made a year ago, and we sort of made at the top of the show, is that you're all much younger than many of your colleagues. You all have families, and you may be the only person on your council who has children of school age or even younger. Has there been a noticeable difference, and how do you balance? Have you found it hard to balance? Most of you are working, you have a job, you have a family, and you have a city council position. How do you balance all that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's I'm the only council member with children, with young children. And so for me, my first year was focused on family-oriented issues like banning e-cigarettes and vaping, and this year is bringing in another preschool. Those are issues that I care about because I'm living it, right? I'm experiencing it with 2 young children, and to have to explain that to my colleagues who potentially don't have children, or their children are all grown up, trying to educate them about why these are important issues. It's really vital to say, you know, I'm living this is what's happening, and I'm a voice for a certain demographic that we can't forget about. And it's interesting that because I also work, I have to balance that, and I'm very fortunate that my employer allows me to do this because they see how important it is, but at the same time, I can't forget about my day job.
Yeah.
You know, I have to put it in the hours.
Anybody else?
You know, I would just add that one of the things that I've actually found most challenging over the past year has actually been calendar management.
Yes.
And I didn't, that was something I did not see at all coming. But it is really key, and I think that relates to this balance. I mean, there are a number of times my wife works and also has her own sort of community engagement obligations where you know, we both had something on a Tuesday night. Our council meetings are on a Tuesday night, and we had arranged childcare and it fell through, or we just couldn't find childcare, and my daughter had to tag along with me to meetings in a couple of instances, and then my wife would pick her up there, and those are just things I didn't see.
Making your kid go to a city council meeting, doesn't that qualify as child abuse?
She doesn't have to say that the whole time.
More than I've had. I mean, we're in very similar boats. I mean, I have young children who you've sort of watched grow up now at this point, and you know, there's a saying in my house the girls use, which is it a mommy night? They want to know, will I be home that night? And if I say yes, it's celebration, because you know, like this week I was gone 4 out of 5 nights doing meetings, doing work for the community, and so the meeting itself, the council meeting, is the tip of the iceberg of what we do. But agreeing with Drew, my girls go everywhere with me. They've been to any number of ribbon cuttings and event openings, and I treat it as it's a part of an education that they're getting. And I hope it's an experience they look back fondly on, and if they don't, I hope they forget about it.
Richa?
My kids are slightly older, and I'm not that young either. So they are interested actually in the city issues and politics overall. And yeah, I had to take them along with me, although you know, I've been able to manage that aspect pretty well. But yeah, first day of their spring break, they were in the council meeting, and they were interested in what is being talked about, and they're interested in topics. They're very well versed with all the regional topics. But yeah, it's about calendar management. That was because I have 3-4 different calendars. So there's council calendar, and then work calendar, and my personal calendar. So
and the council calendar is a public document, so you have to really be mindful of not mixing the two, don't you?
Exactly. And one of the first things I was like, you know, this is an idea for a startup to come up with. I don't think a solution exists. I tried many different solutions, but I don't think the integration works because of several nuances. So calendar management, and then I come from, like, my professional background these days is all about iterations and pivoting and modifying. So I try a thing, and if it doesn't work, then I give it a thought and try something else. So it's trial and error, and some days are more bumpy than others. So you know, I would say, like, either it's a crazy busy day or just busy day.
Yeah, that's right. 2 flavors.
We're going to take another quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back with 4 rookie members of City Council.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. We're hearing stories about children who want to be the members of the City Council. The fun part of the job. Let me shift gears a little bit. We've emphasized the fact that you're younger, you're balancing careers as well as families. Is there a generational difference in how you approach this job that you've noticed? And we can ask this question without you being negative about your colleagues, but you're bringing a different approach to it. You're not all millennials, but you're all younger. You're more social media adept. You brought a different approach to the campaign. Is there a difference in how you approach the job that you've either had council colleagues adapt to, or you've had to adapt to their way?
Definitely. I mean, I think the example to use here was the breastfeeding issue that came up in Redwood City. So our council is 6 women and 1 man, and there was a topic of leave of absence for boards and commission members, and the proposal that after 3 months absence they would be removed. Well, as a mother who had...
After 3 months of absence.
Correct.
Yes.
As a mother who had been on planning commission, who had breastfed, and I knew how difficult that was, I felt this was an opportunity to use my voice as a parent to elevate an issue that probably otherwise wouldn't have been brought up.
Right.
And I was surprised by the response from my colleagues, and it turned out it wasn't a gender issue, it was a generational issue, because the idea of these amazing parental leaves is now commonplace in many of the companies that we worked for, but wasn't a generation ago, wasn't the expectation. And so I've seen a number of those occasions where things have changed, and it's about bringing that other generation along and letting them know, hey, this is how we do things now, and there's an opportunity to change.
Anybody else? Richa.
For me, it has been, I don't know if it's generational or the professional background, if you will, because one of the things that I would say, being naive, demanded and asked for was very tangible information on any issue that was presented to me. So when I'm looking at an issue and when I'm analyzing, I wouldn't want to do analysis paralysis, but at the same time, I requested the staff to be a little bit more buttoned up than I had seen previous reports. So I would want data and information and facts to be able to make that decision. And I was a little surprised that it wasn't done with that rigor before. And I was a little surprised that not everyone was asking for the same information or approaching a decision kind of the same way. So I kind of attributed that to professional differences, and that's the value all different council members bring to the table. So they look at an issue from their perspective, and I guess I was bringing my perspective. But I've encountered that more often than not.
Anybody else?
I think with me, like I mentioned earlier, is that the issues that I brought up the first year are issues that I care about because I'm living it right now. And so a segment of the population who are young parents, young families, those are issues that they care about. You know, they care about affordable housing as well, but they also care about like good schools. They care about childcare. They want to make sure that there's a good preschool is affordable. Those are issues that they care about that maybe my colleagues might not have a grasp on or understand because there's a generational issue, right? Because they're not working on the issue right now, they're not living it, but you are every day. So you have a kind of special prism to kind of work through that and see what the issue is.
Well, the PUC project you mentioned before, that may be an example because you're more acutely aware of the difficulty of finding a house and staying in the area than someone who's been here for 25, 30 years.
Right.
You know, I was born at third base and thinks they hit a triple. Is that a good example of another issue?
Yeah, and childcare too. So childcare costs, at least in Redwood City, but probably in your cities, had gone up 41% in 5 years.
Right.
So if you're paying for 1 or 2 kids, it's like a second mortgage.
Right.
And just, it's not that they don't, it's just that they don't know because they're not doing that. And so it's so great to have diverse opinions and perspectives on councils to where you could say, hey, this is a big issue for a large subset of our community. Let's prioritize it, and that's what we did.
Yeah, I've actually, some of my colleagues have actually said, we're really glad that you're on the council because you bring that perspective we didn't have before. And it's important to have that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that point. Yeah, we actually just purchased our first house a few months ago, and so certainly didn't get in at the ground floor. And there is sort of a awareness of like what that experience today looks like, right? And that so many people in our community are going through that. And I certainly bring that to the council. I will have to admit, the only member of the council that doesn't get the agenda and staff reports printed out. I go all online, and so that could be generational. I don't know, but
Probably
saving the environment.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Although, you know,
I saw those. I was like, no, please don't print those anymore.
We're good.
when I always advise people when they buy their first home, don't look at the year it's going to be paid off or the amount you're going to pay.
Or the interest. It's frightening.
Which they front
It's
load.
frightening, yes.
So, Mark, you mentioned that there have been times when your colleagues said, I'm really glad you're bringing this perspective.
Yeah.
Have there been times for some of you where somebody said, it's not your turn. You need to sit back and be quiet and not speak up so much? I mean, I would imagine there might be some instances where somebody thinks, you need to wait your turn. Has that happened to any of you?
I've never been told, wait your turn, but I think for me, it's more like I had to prove myself. Because there's individuals in the community who've served for a long time, and they have their certain view of things. And being the newbie, I felt like I had to work twice as hard to prove that I belonged here, that I belong on this council. And I think in a lot of ways I've showed that. And I think my colleagues have appreciated that, the fact that things I brought up are things that the community is also talking about, but because I bring that different perspective, I can lead on that issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the same experience for everybody else. Giselle?
Well, okay, so two sides to that coin. One is, I will say, I don't feel I had a half year, right? I got in, and from day one, I was getting very meaty assignments. We had our first retreat in February. We looked at our then strategic plan. It had 7 priorities, and coming from a strategic planning background, I said, if you have 7, you have 0. We need to focus. We need to focus on the issues most important. Then Mayor Bain said, great, now you're on the strategic planning committee. And I spent the next year really digging in on that. We just approved it at our last meeting. Had the same experience on PCE, wasn't even a full board member. I was an alternate, and they put me on their strategic planning committee. I'm on point for homelessness with Diana Reddy. So I feel like there hasn't been a wait your turn in that sense. But I will say in our county, I do believe there is a sense of that. You wait to run for office, you're told to wait your turn. I was certainly told that when I ran, and that's something that I want to be a part of changing, because I think we need leadership and courageous leadership to continue to take this county forward and give ourselves a bigger voice regionally.
Drew, you took out an incumbent, so I think a lot of people probably told you.
Sure.
Yeah, I certainly didn't get. I felt this time around it was more of a sort of an equal. I certainly was a challenger of sense, but I didn't get a wait your turn. Now, the first time I ran in 2014, I certainly did get that sentiment that you haven't put in your dues. My response is that these roles aren't a birthright, and that part of the process is that you run and you put your ideas out there, and you see who the public chooses. And so for me, even though that sentiment didn't come up the second time around, it still was front mind for me. It's like this isn't something, like, even though I had served on the planning commission for a number of years, I came to the second try with that same sentiment that, like, these positions aren't due or owed to anyone, and I'm going to prove to you why I think I should be elected.
Yeah. Now, Richa, you were smiling. It seems to me you have gotten some pushback in your first year from your colleagues.
Well, year one, we were told, it was publicly commented that the younger council members, and we had 2 last year, will not get, without experience, will not get the committees and regional assignments until they have experience. So I was extremely interested, because of my corporate background, I was extremely interested in some of the committees and boards. So year one, I didn't get those. Same thing kind of has happened this year too, but I take that in a positive way. I try to do well. So I got commute.org along with you, and whatever I got, I tried to do a good job. And I've heard that from several elected officials, some senior ones, that we have heard that you are doing your job. So I think it was probably a blessing in disguise, I guess, that I had less and I was able to focus in on those. So I would say that I'm underutilized from that standpoint this year as well. But you find ways to give back. You find ways to contribute, because there is no one stopping me to look at the agenda or the materials that is shared for a regional body that I'm not on. So it's up to me to do that work if I'm interested. And also, along those lines, the regional aspect that you mentioned, completely agree with you. And one of the biggest disappointments for me, that was one of the questions I guess you had, Mark. I heard from a senior elected official that Foster City has been an island, not just geographically, but also in terms of being involved in on regional matters. And that, as I realized, I was very disappointed to hear that I realized it's kind of a chicken and egg. So when Foster City Council members would try for some regional positions, they would not get that, so they will get discouraged and would not try. So I tried to change that in the right spirit, because so many of issues that, as I said, that we deal with are regional. So I tried for the CASA board, I tried for the HART board, just to be able to change that perception and to be able to demonstrate that, yes, we can do the work and we can collaborate and we can get involved. But yeah, like Giselle said, I think that I heard the sentiment, you're way too new, give it more time. So.
Well, we have a little more time, but we're going to take a break right now. We'll come back for our last segment with 4 new city council members.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game one more time. I'm Mark Simon. My partner Kevin Mullen is on assignment. We're joined by 4 city council members who've just completed their first year in office. Richa Awasthi from Foster City, Drew Combs from Menlo Park, Giselle Hale from Redwood City, and Mark Nagales from South San Francisco. We talked a little bit more about this topic off the air, so let's go back to that, what you were talking about. There may not be overt wait your turn on your council, although there can sometimes manifest itself, as you say, Richa, in some of these regional committee assignments. And these regional assignments are really big issues that get dealt with. And also, if you're interested in running for something else, a way to really develop a network throughout the county. But it does show up in just who gets to run and how they get to run it. And Giselle, you were talking a little bit about there maybe needs to be a change. Foster City, one of the reasons we've talked about that they don't get regional assignments is they have a 2-term limit. So nobody thinks there's any point in investing a lot of time and energy in putting you on, say, the Caltrain board when you're going to be off in less than 3 years. So Giselle, what was the point you were making off the air?
Well, it's interesting. We're about to look at doing some campaign contribution limits in Redwood City, and in the spirit of fairness, right? And I think that's one side of the coin. The other side is it's difficult to run if there isn't an open seat to run for. And it's hard to put a dollar amount on incumbency, but incumbents have a lot of advantages. And I do believe there is at times a rubber stamp mentality around supporting incumbents versus giving a look at new candidates. And I would love to see more competition in our county. If you look at San Francisco and San Jose, they have no problem competing, but from competition, often you get better results, right?
Well,
so
they also will run against incumbents, which is something that was unusual. Drew did it, but it was also district elections, which is supposed to make a difference in
county supervisors.
The willingness to take on, but it hasn't made a difference yet on the Board of Supervisors. Is the district elections maybe the key, or is it just one of them?
I mean, certainly, I think district elections offers a barrier that isn't as great. I mean, you can think about sort of like a dollar figure on what it takes to run, what can be considered a legitimate campaign. It's less at a district level, and so in that sense, I do think. I mean, obviously, Menlo Park, we've just had one district election, and I know other cities along the peninsula are adopting it. I do think you'll see challengers being more inspired, or seeing that hey, maybe I can do this with like $5,000, right? Or like now you're looking at doing just a district-wide mailer and not a city-wide mailer. Right. And I do think, again, lowering those barriers, we'll see it eventually. We haven't seen it as much yet. But
well, and you were able to knock on every door in your district more than once, right?
Yeah.
So that makes a difference as well.
Yeah.
I want to, the issues you dealt with in the campaign are the same issues everywhere: housing, traffic, growth, and I guess, because it's not a city council responsibility, but it still comes up, schools. How has your understanding of these issues changed since you've gotten elected? A lot of times people find that the issues are more complex than they thought they were when they were running once they get elected. Has that been your experience?
I think for me, realizing how much this, for housing, affordable housing, how much the state plays into this formula, in a sense that you have RENA numbers where you have to build a certain number of units. And then in terms of local control, that might be a little less because the state is telling you, well, you have to build, and you can't deny a project because of your neighborhood, it doesn't like the fact that it's too high. So the fact that maybe we don't have as much local control is something that's really surprised me in going into this.
Anybody else? Richa.
I would agree, definitely the understanding of the issues gets broader. So when you talk about housing, and by virtue of attending meetings and conferences, you get a holistic view of how bad the problem is. And then you understand that and you want to do something about it, but then you have to act locally as well. So as an example, all the cities are now looking at SB 50 now. And one of the most important things that I've been asking of staff is, what is really the impact for Foster City? I want that very clearly spelled out. While I want to contribute to solving the regional problem, Foster City wants to contribute and has done its part to solve the regional housing crisis. We also need to take along with us those who have concerns. So we need to really understand the issue at local level before making any decisions. And so that's getting an understanding, wanting to do something about it, and understanding how difficult it is and how less of a control you have in solving these things, which you do understand, but at times you end up feeling helpless a little bit, like the cost of housing, and when you look at the RENA numbers and the local control, et cetera, and the land that you have available. Similarly for traffic. I mean, Foster City had a pilot to address the traffic issues locally. There was a lot of cut-through traffic, so we did a pilot and we monitored the results of that and we made that permanent. But we have very little control over solving regional, and hence, the competition at the regional boards, regional level, newer ideas, more involvement of all the cities is going to be very critical.
We've talked about young families, young professionals. The peninsula is changing. A lot of the housing issues you're dealing with are reflective of that change. It's becoming a more urban setting. Is it for the better? I mean, one of the other issues is a lot of the people in your communities have been there a long time. A lot of the elected officials come from a background where they're committed to or come from the status quo. How much is it changing, and how much responsibility do you have as sort of younger leaders to make this change happen and to help people understand it?
I mean, a lot of our job is change management, if you will. It is helping to educate the community about the challenges and what the available options are. You can look at it as the physical is changing. The way the city looks is changing. The way my neighborhood looks is changing. But then you can get to a deeper personal level and a values level. Is that change palatable if it means your children can still live here? Your grandchildren can still live here. Your parents can age in place. These are really the issues to me, is how we treat each other, families. In Redwood City right now, we are grappling with RV homelessness. We've had the largest growth rate in the county, and I've gone out and I've met with both the neighbors and members of that community, the homeless community. And they're a new breed of homeless. These are, by and large, working individuals. They're working, they have ties to the community. I met one man, 41-year-old, lifelong Redwood City resident. couldn't pay rent anymore. And he's living in an RV, and he's grateful for the RV because he's not in a tent. And so these are very heady issues, and at times like this require they require bold actions and bold solutions and deep discussion about who are we and what do we value. Are we okay with people living on the streets, or do we want to find an alternative solution?
But Mark, when it's time to try and work on those solutions, you're often hearing from someone who doesn't want the change, and wants things to stay the way they are, and in fact thinks that the changes that are taking place undermine what they value in the community, which is why they've stayed here and why they wanted to move here in the first place. How do you balance that?
Well, that's a great question. I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out an answer to that as well. I mean, with the PUC development, I mean, that neighborhood, they came out in full force saying we did not want 8 stories in our neighborhood. And in a lot of ways, those people have lived in the community for 20, 25, 30 years. So in a lot of ways, they got theirs already, right? And so they're worried about their way of living. And so you have to be able to balance that and say, okay, we understand you have concerns, but at the same time, we have to look down the road and say, we have a housing problem here. I mean, San Mateo County was, what, 25 to 1 in terms of jobs to housing ratio at one point. Then went down to 15. Now it's down to, I think, 11 to 1. So we're doing our part. But at the same time, you're getting that pushback from the community saying, you're building too much too fast. Well, they might say, oh, we're not against housing, we just want you...
You just want it somewhere else.
You just want it somewhere else. Well, then you have this land use issue. Like, well, we're running out of land, so the only thing we can really do is build up.
And traffic.
Yeah.
True.
And I would just say, sometimes the pushback comes from, you know, I think a valid or legitimate place in the sense of, like, we all accept that there needs to be greater housing, but then that in and of itself, denser housing, more housing, creates additional resource challenges. Then the school district is also looking into then, well, what's our capacity to take on the new kids? And then there are other just sort of resources. There's water, the age code question in California. So there are these legitimate concerns about, like, when you take a suburban environment that is essentially built around single-family detached homes, and you move it to something, and the sort of the transportation flow is all built around that level of density. When you move it to something of which I agree, and I think all of us, needs to be denser, because we can't have people in our community living in RVs long term. And so I do think it's how you respond to that, how you, like, embrace people's concerns, but also give them a vision for, like, you know, the suburban way of life can evolve, and you can still, all of those things that you care about can still exist.
Yeah. I've got a couple of quick questions. One is, you're a year in. You don't have to announce today, but would you be willing to run for re-election?
Well, I have to. That's
right. You're up next.
I'm not this year because South San Francisco is going to district elections. So.
And you got the short straw.
So our district is going to be up. So we'll have to run again.
Yeah. Anybody else? Do you like the job enough to want to do it another 7 years? Richa?
So one of the things, one of the things we learned in our ethics training, which was...
Don't answer the question like that?
No.
Good, tell us, Richa, what did you learn? Yeah.
That, which I really appreciated, and I've probably mentioned this to several people, and I take it by heart, is that when you're serving and when you're making decisions, it should not be based, your decision should only be based on what is best for your city, should not be based on whether they'll make you more popular or whether they will increase your chances of getting re-elected.
Right. Okay, well, let's assume you're all behaving that way. The question is, is a job intriguing enough that you're interested in doing it more than one term?
So with that, that guideline, for me, I want to focus in the job that I'm doing and add value and not even think about re-election.
All right, Drew?
I would say I certainly am open to it, but at the end of my first term, that will actually represent, like, a decade of either serving on a council or a commission. And so I could also see at that point saying that, like, yeah, I've served, again, for 10 years in this space, and you know, it would possibly be time to move on. I'm not saying I'm not running, but I'm saying that for me, it's just not the term. For me, again, like I say, I look at the totality of my involvement in this space.
Giselle?
Open to a number of paths, and I'd say I wouldn't make any decision without input from the community. I mean, it was people in the community who first came to me and asked me to run. And then that was a really important part of factoring it in. And then without consulting my tiny bosses, my boss. They're key stakeholders in these decisions.
Well, thank you for coming back after a year in office. This has been an engaging conversation. Richa Awasthi from Foster City, Drew Combs from Menlo Park, Giselle Hale from Redwood City, and Mark Nagales from South San Francisco. Thank you all for being here. And thank you for being with us. And join us next time on The Game.